Hello, this is Arnold Mangioli for Grateful, Ready, Open, Willing, and this is a talk that is for a very small and specific group of people. I am uh, doing this video to talk with those folks who are interested in becoming casting directors, casting associates, casting assistants. And the reason for this is because we are joyfully in the process of expanding our staff, which I'm very happy about. There are many blessings of work. I am a bit of a Chekhov geek, and Chekhov in his plays talks about work, and if one wants a good life, a human life, one must work. And I'm a big fan of work. I think it's a really good thing. So we had a process of going through resumes and holding interviews. Let me clarify, this is not part of the CSA mentorship program, though I'll talk about that in a minute. This is just some free advice from one human who has been doing this longer than almost every one of the people whose resumes I received has been alive. So it may be of some use to you. There also may be some use to the general population about interviews, resumes, and breaking into a particular niche area of whatever your own industry may be. So there are two things I want to talk about. One is the resume submissions and interview process, and the other is some free advice about going into casting as a profession, something I've been doing for quite a while. So, firstly, let's start with the submissions, the resumes. When you send your cover letter or email or communication, that's your first impression. So, please be conscious about leading with your best foot forward. That's probably the best way to make a first impression. Do not send a form letter which says very flowery things about how, because of your esteemed career and I have so much respect for your office and everything that you've done, I would really like to work for you. If it's very obviously a form letter, a to whom it may concern letter that you use with every resume you submit, because it feels somewhere between obsequious and hypocritical. If you have something specific to say to the person whose office you're applying for a job with, then it makes sense to reference something specific. But this flowery language of, oh, because of your reputation and because this is such a great office, like to put that in a general letter, it's like, wow. And careful of dating people who do that. I just want to say that. Okay, so spell people's names correctly on your resume. I know that probably seems obvious, but I was really surprised that with resumes that people are gearing toward a casting job in a casting office where everyone's name must be spelled correctly, especially famous people, but all actors. And if on your resume you have famous people's names spelled incorrectly, then you're disqualifying yourself for the job at the very start. Now, that is good advice for anyone's resume. Go through, don't just rely on spell check, because spell check won't, of course, check the names of people, but make sure that everything you need to spell correctly is spelled correctly. I'm not holding you to a standard that is not one that I hold myself to. I have the same thing. I mean, if I'm contacting someone at a specific theater, there are many theaters that in their name spell theater ER, and there are many theaters that in their name spell theater with an RE at the end. RE being the British spelling, I think, originally, and ER being the American spelling. But theaters throughout America use one or the other. So I'm constantly looking up, if I'm contacting someone, the exact spelling of the name of the organization or the exact spelling of their particular title or their name. So again, I may be belaboring the point here, but it really does, if that's on your resume, and I saw several that way, it one might want to think of a different profession. This may not be the ideal place for you. I don't mean to sound harsh. It's just that that kind of detail work is really, it's what we do. I used to have a giant lollipop in my office, and I wrote on it in big marker, God is in the details, and I'd wave it in the face of our interns to teach them how important that was. And it's now written on the back of a tiara, which I actually have back there somewhere. let's talk about the interviews. Show up for the interview. I know that may seem obvious, but we actually ran the gamut from people who scheduled an interview and then canceled it at the last minute and then requested that I make time to reschedule the meeting, which I then did, and then they didn't show up. And when I followed up to say, I'm at the Zoom link for our interview, can you please tell me what happened? Are you okay? No response. Wow. So there was that, all the way to people showing up with a proper background, looking professional, enthused, listening during the interview so that they could respond and say, well, actually, the experience that I have that most closely relates to the thing you need, and we could communicate with one another, and they met me in the interview as fellow professionals, and that was just a joy. It's just like auditioning. It's not just I'm interviewing you. It's also we're assessing one another. We're trying to make sense of, is this a good batch? When an actor comes into an audition, it's not just, okay, we in casting are deciding whether or not this person is a fit for the role. The actor is also checking us out and saying, what are these people like? Is this a theater I'd want to work at? Is this a gig I would like to have? Does this director seem like they'd be really cool to work with, and this will be a good experience? The same way the casting director and the director and the rest of the creative team is checking out the actor. So it works both ways in any interview or audition situation. So feel free to assess, but most importantly, be fully present, because that's the best way to do that and the best way to make an impression with us. Uh, in my office, we mostly do theater casting. Uh, there is a Csa Training Program that is run by the Casting Society of America. If you go to castingsociety.com, and you click at the bottom on the I forget what it's called, trading or careers or whatever is there, it will take you then to the castingsocietycares.org link, where this training program is run, which is terrific. I love that they have it. I love that several of you came from that program who applied for the jobs at my office. It was brought to my attention in conversations that the casting training program is mostly focused on TV and film casting. Theater is much less of a focus. And this makes sense for CSA, and I'll get into that in a moment. I cast mostly for theater. Yes, we do film, we do TV. We've done a handful of commercials over the years, and even less voiceovers. But theater is my first love, and it's a bit of a niche within a niche industry. So it's very, very focused, and that is my background and what I love to do. What do you love to do? Okay, so let's move on to the advice. That was my experience of the resumes and cover letters and approaches and the interviews that we did. I went through every resume. I was so excited. There were so many wonderful people, and we met so many wonderful people, and I'm so sad that we only have one or two positions we can make this work with, because I want to hire all of you. So let me give you some free advice. Firstly, don't. I know. It's the same advice you were given as an actor if you started out as an actor, right? People told you all the time, don't. If you can possibly find something else that you can do with your life and be happy, please go do that other thing. And that is good advice for actors, because, as one goes on in one's life and gets to later years, one does not want to be in a place of resentment. One wants to know, I love doing this. This is the thing that I was meant to do. This is the choice I made, and I feel good about my choice, right? So when we say don't, we want to give you some of the outlay of the truth and things you need to think about. One is very important. The Casting Society of America is not a union. We are more of a guild. We're not unionized, meaning if you work your way up from a casting assistant to a casting associate to a casting director, there's no health care, there's no pension and welfare, there's no benefits. That's important to note when you're making career choices, because almost every single other position you will find on the title page of a playbill or a program is unionized and has those things. And I understand that health care and like your pension fund and those sorts of things probably not as important to you in your 20s. They certainly weren't for me in my 20s as they will become later. But if you're maybe 25-ish and you feel like, you're just out of college a couple of years and you're starting out, well, just think about that chunk of time that you feel like it's hardly anything yet. You do that one more time and you're 50. So these things, by that point, will likely be important. And as a casting director, unless you're working for a company or a studio or an organization casting within that organization, and those things are provided by that company, they're not something you get in your independent work because we're not a union and it's not protected and it's not provided. So know that going into it, eyes wide open. Another aspect of it that one needs to be mindful of is that we are pre-production in casting. So this was explained to me years ago, and it makes a lot of sense. When when one is planning a production, for example, a film, and one has a budget of millions and millions of dollars, one must be very mindful in producing this project that as time goes on, uh, we are likely to get to a point where there will be very expensive delays and problems to solve that come up. So, for example, if you're on a film shoot somewhere and you have your stars in fabulous, very expensive hotels in the most luxurious suites, and you have all of your crew and all of your cast and your extras and everybody, and it rains for 4 days in a row, and all of a sudden shooting is delayed for 4 days, that $250,000, $500,000 per day that you're spending on that shoot, suddenly you have to come up with an extra $2 million in the production process. So the idea is every producer needs to keep all of their money available for production, and the way they do that is by keeping pre-production expenses as low as possible. Squish them down as low as possible so that the money is available here. And unfortunately, casting is here, in pre-production. So it's just good to be aware that these are some of the challenges our profession faces. And if you're going to come into this profession, you want to be mindful that this is the game board, and as you're stepping onto it, right? Know the game board. So those are some things I think are worth consideration. I don't think they're absolutes. There may be other casting directors who might disagree with me and say, oh, actually, this is less of a problem or whatever. I don't know any casting director who would think that the lack of health care and pension and welfare is a lesser problem. As I say, if you're in an organization or working for a studio or a corporation where they provide that, then it may not be a problem for you. But it is something that certainly for those of us who are independent offices, it's a very real thing, and it must be contended with. So when I was in my 20s starting out, I was working at a casting office, and a very, very big LA casting director came and worked out of that office for several weeks a year, doing the New York casting for his pilots and episodes and things. And he was great, and we became friends. And my then roommate and I had him over for dinner one night. We said, "You're here for weeks. You're eating in restaurants. Come have a home cooked meal." And he came over, and we had the loveliest night, the greatest conversation. And he was in his 50s at the time, and he confided to me and said, "Arnold, just trust me. You don't want to be a casting director in your 50s. You want to branch out somewhere else earlier." Now, that doesn't mean at 22, but he was just warning me that the ground shifts a little bit in the casting world toward people as they get older. And I, of course, did not heed this advice, but I am at a stage of my life where I understand what he meant. So it's good to be conscious of that as well, that this is not a profession where necessarily, doesn't go for everybody, but for a lot of people, it's not a profession that respects how we build our credentials and how good we get at what we do. It's nice when a profession does that. I imagine a lot of professions certainly don't guarantee that, right? Okay, so all of that is in the don't column. Also, do. First of all, follow your bliss. That's Joseph Campbell's advice in the hero's journey, right? Follow your bliss. You'll know what to do. It will lead you to the right thing. If this brings you joy, step into it. Go for it, right? Um, there are many casting directors who go on to be studio heads and producers and have very, very successful careers, especially in the TV world and out in Los Angeles. And it makes perfect sense because the amount of detail work and the amount of organization and the amount of having our minds in so many different places and keeping track of so much, it lends itself very nicely to producing and overseeing entire projects because that's what we do. We oversee the entire casting project or the casting of the project. So taking the step to overseeing the entire project, it's basically the same skill set. The skills that you develop will be invaluable no matter what you do, whether you stay in casting, whether you develop a career in casting, or go on to producing or being a studio head or creating your own content or whatever forms of new media are ahead of us in the world that we don't even know about yet. The skills are invaluable even if you go into an entirely other profession. It's a great set of skills to develop. So in that sense, I feel like in a way it can't be beat. I'm also a big fan of learning. Learn. Uh, there's a book by T.H. White called The Once and Future King. I don't know if they still read it in high schools. Maybe they do. But it's the book about King Arthur and the Round Table and the novel on which the musical Camelot is based. So there's a little section of the book I remember reading from way back in high school. I never forgot it. It was so great. Merlin, who is the wizard, kind of like, I guess, the Dumbledore character in the Harry Potter series in many ways, very wise, magic, and carries a wand, wears similar robes, and Wart, which is the nickname of the young King Arthur when he's a boy, says at one point something about being depressed, how he's just very depressed today. He's not feeling himself. He's a little sad, and Merlin says to him, "Learn something." And Wart's like, what, learn something? Learn what? What are you talking about? And Merlin says, learn something. It's the only cure I know for depression, or to bring us out of ourselves. Learn something. So I think that in casting, you will learn many, many things about people, about interacting, about how to get things done, about problem solving. Oh, it's like the best for problem solving. It provides a great work ethic because casting is somewhat uncompromising. The director, the choreographer, the writer, the composer, lyricist, whatever applies in the given project, they all have things that they want. The producer most of all. And we must provide those things. There is no margin of like, oh yeah, when you get to it. They want it, and they want it now, and working in casting, one learns to deliver. And that's a really good work ethic to have no matter where you go in your life. It's a great approach to one's work. It changes you. Casting changes you. It's such an all-encompassing type of work. I guess one could say demanding, but it's such a huge mountain to scale on every single project. And in the same way, one has those experiences and those adventures and grows and learns from those adventures. It changes you. It's important to not fall into resentment because it's also a tough business. It's a somewhat thankless profession, and sometimes people can be kind of mean about it. I hate to say that, but there's a certain amount of that where the work has to be its own reward, and it's really important to stay grateful. Grateful. There's grateful up here on my sign. There you go. It's really important to stay grateful, and what I try to do in my own life is I try to have just a barrage of gratitudes every morning. Keep a gratitude journal, speak out your gratitudes, just find a zillion things to be grateful for in any given moment. I'm grateful for the meditation book on my desk that my friend Lori gave me, and she's so wonderful and good friend and also a bit of a guru in my own life. I'm grateful for the giant "It is done" sign that I have on my desk that my friend Sark had me draw in one of her workshops, just to focus on the joy of feeling what it's like when something's done so that we don't get too bogged down in all of the steps along the way in the process. I'm grateful for the beautiful plant on my desk that is blooming with flowers and the view from the window and all of the little trinkets and stones, and I'm grateful for this technology. This is remarkable that we can have this communication this way. I'm grateful in the morning for my cup of coffee. I have the best coffee. My partner gets me this really great coffee from Seattle, and it's a small roaster, and sometimes just one sip of that, and I'm like, life is so good. So if we stay focused there, then it is likely we will not fall into a place of resentment when we are dealing with casting casualties and things, such as I have been the casting director of several Broadway shows where on opening night they've invited, by naming the position, everybody up on stage. They want the director to come up, and they want the costume designer to come up, and all the designers, and they want the stage crew to come out, and they always forget to mention casting. And that is the thing I've witnessed a good number of times. So it's easy to fall into a place of resentment, feeling like I'm being mistreated. But the Course in Miracles reminds us, I believe the quote is, beware of the temptation to perceive yourself unfairly treated. So we avoid that by staying grateful. Okay, some of the most wonderful people you will ever meet anywhere, one can meet in a casting career. Some of the most terrible people too, but really some of the most wonderful people. So we focus our energies there, and just my staff, the people I've had the pleasure of being with, who have worked with me and interned with me over the years, have gone on to such great things, which has been such a joy to witness. But also the way our lives have intersected, and the things I've been able to teach them and the things they've been able to teach me have all been such a gift. Don't skip the learning part. Don't forget that's why we're here. Uh, um, Along those lines, I want to say maybe maybe don't assume your expertise. I know there's a lot of pressure right now culturally on that, because social media, we all have to like put out a picture of how happy we are and how satisfied and all the great things we're doing, and how fit we look in a bathing suit in the summer, and how relaxed we are by the fireplace in the winter, and all the things that I see people posting pictures of that I think, oh, none of that feels real to me. But I, uh, I think we have to be careful not to fall into that trap. So I did see some resumes where people use the title associate casting director, and the description of duties was completely that of assistant, not associate, which is actually a different title that has a different meaning and a different set of responsibilities to it. Um, I have seen resumes, and over time, I've seen resumes like this a fair amount, where people have hung out a shingle and said, I'm a casting director, and in their background, in their resume, which when applying for a job one would get to see, you can see that they've done an internship for 3 months, and that doesn't necessarily qualify someone to be a casting director any more than in any other profession. 3 months of interning would qualify one to be in the top position of that profession with the level of experience that competes with those who've been doing it for decades. In my own career, I was an assistant casting director and an associate casting director for about 10 or 12 years before I headed up a department, and I was in the industry probably 20 years before I hung out a shingle and created Manjoli Theatricals, which is my casting office. So I'm a big fan of learning. I'm a big fan of assisting and interning, and I, you know, it's funny, the intern thing. I know it's a tricky thing now, because some people in our industry, and I imagine in other industries, have abused that, um, using people as free labor and calling them interns. Originally, I did not want any internships in my office. I grew up in a middle class economically middle class background in my family, and my dad was very much of the ethic of a day's wages for a day's work, and I think that's important and great, and I don't like to do work that's unpaid, and I don't expect anyone else to. But I also teach at NYU, and I've done workshops at universities and places all over well, in several countries actually, not all over the world, but in many places in the world. Uh, and and students would come to me and ask for the opportunity to intern, and I've said I don't take on free labor, I don't do that, and they basically convinced me that it would be a very good opportunity for them, and they would like it. So I acquiesced, and I started accepting interns, and they've been very good experiences overall for me in my office. But of course, I'm an office that's a bit more independent. I'm not handling 45 Broadway shows per season, so we can be more directly involved, and there's more learning and teaching that gets exchanged. So as I say, I know people have abused that in some cases, and I'm sad to have learned, but. Uh, some of the resumes I saw, they seem so promising because there's an interesting skill set and some good education there. And I think, well, I looked at probably 50 resumes in detail, and I thought, well, there's about 10 or so people here I would love to interview. I just don't have the time to interview everyone. And if you don't have any experience in a casting office, how do you get competitive to get a job in a casting office without ever having been in one when other people have completed the CSA mentorship program and done an apprenticeship with a casting director or done an internship? Years ago there used to be a saying in the industry that if you wanted to get into casting, the way you do it is you go intern for a casting director and wait for someone to die, and then you might get moved up. And that's this is a little dark humor, but in fact, it was that tricky because it's such a niche industry. So I don't know. I can only say it's been good experiences for me, and the people who've interned with me have certainly shared that feedback. Uh, Trust. That's a big one to me. Trust. There is a guiding hand. It is not a hand you can see. But if you're someone who is a bit younger in this industry and kind of starting out, uh, trust. Let me tell you a little bit of my own story, my own career as a casting director, and explain why I believe there's this guiding hand that really takes care of us. Um, so when I was in high school, I wanted to go to college for drama. And the two main schools on my list were Adelphi University and NYU. And I wanted to go to NYU, but I also recognized college was very expensive. And Adelphi offered a full scholarship, full 4-year free ride if you went through this application process. So I told my parents I would go through the application process, and if I got the Adelphi scholarship, I would go there. But if I didn't get a full scholarship, then NYU would be my preference of the two because they were going to pay for one or the other, and they were willing to do it. God bless them. And so that was kind of our deal. Now, when I was in high school, like so many of us, I had a group of friends I hung out with, and in our circle of friends, sometimes other people would bring along their friends or their brother or their sister or their cousin or whatever. And a friend of mine brought along his cousins sometimes when we'd go out in a large group to Pizza Beat, or one of the places that we hung out in high school. And so his cousin, let's say his name was Juan. Okay, so Juan and I had this funny, quirky thing where we looked a lot alike. People noticed it right away from the first time he joined our group. People were like, "You two could be twins." It was just this crazy thing where at that point in our lives, in our youth, we just happened to look extremely similar. The development of our facial features, the way our hair was, whatever, we looked pretty much like twins. So anyway, I went through the process with the written applications and such, and I got invited to the scholarship day, which was a day of classes and exercise they put you through, from which they selected the winner of the scholarship for Adelphi University. I have no idea if they still do this or not, but a friend of mine, my friend who had this cousin, said, "Oh, Juan was invited to the day as well. Isn't that funny?" And I said, "Oh, great! There'll be somebody there I know. That's terrific." So people came from all over the country, and this day happened. And Juan and I saw each other, and in a situation like that, it's very crowded, and there's somebody you know, and you kind of gravitate together. And all day long, people were like, "Are you two twin brothers?" And we are like, "No, we just actually know each other, but sort of peripherally. It's hard to explain." And anyway, so what ended up happening was we went through the day, and I ended up not getting the scholarship. As it happens, Juan got the scholarship, but my parents agreed that I could go to NYU, and I ended up getting scholarships eventually from my work there because they didn't give it at the beginning. They gave it as you went based on accomplishment. So it all worked out perfectly. Um, all right, so what I want to tell you is that I am here making this video because of my career as an actor. I have won awards. I have this wonderful thing called Grateful, Ready, Open, Willing, where I am trying to promote the ideals of gratitude. Well, let's not call them ideals. Let's call them practices of gratitude, readiness, openness, and willingness in the industry and beyond. And I'm established as a casting director. So let's look at my career and say, how did that happen? Okay, the way that happened is if we trace it back, I was the head of casting for Disney Theatricals. I forget my title. I think it was Associate Producer of Casting or something like that. And that was a position that enabled me to open my own company with a very strong reputation. Now, the job at Disney came about because prior to that, I was my title, I think, was Senior Vice President of Casting and Creative Development for a company called Livent, and I cast many Broadway shows, the original premiere production of Ragtime, and the Hal Prince, Susan Stroman Showboat, and the Tony Award winning Best Musical, I think is the of Fosse, and the last Broadway revival of Candide, and Phantom of the Opera, and Sunset Boulevard, and lots of shows. And I did that for a period of, I think, about 6 years before the company just kind of came down in flames and the producer went to prison and all these terrible things happened. But in that period, I developed all these credentials and Broadway credits. So that happened because I was working at Johnson Lift Casting for Jeff Johnson and Vinnie Lift, two of my favorite people who ever lived, both gone now. And I worked for them for a while. And got to meet the producer of the show. The show they handed me that they were working on at the time was Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and I cast Donny Osmond, and that was how it developed that I ended up with an in-house position at that company because Donny Osmond and Joseph is basically what funded that company for many years after that. So the way that happened was I was working at Hughes Moss Casting, and the Casting Society of America was a new fledgling organization. And when it began, they had me be the assistant for the East Coast, meaning I was the person I was a casting assistant, eventually a casting associate at Hughes Moss Casting. And Julie Hughes was a board member of the CSA, which was mostly based in Los Angeles at the time. And they hired me while I was working at Hughes Moss Casting as a casting director, to also communicate with all of the casting directors in New York, to set up meeting times for CSA, and to attend the meetings, and to take the minutes, and to send reports to them, and to take surveys, all of those kinds of things. So I developed a working relationship with every major casting director in New York. And that happened because I was working at Hughes Moss. And knowing them, when I left Hughes Moss to pursue my own directing interests, they were all calling me saying, could you be my assistant for me on this gig? Could you do associate work on this gig? And I was jobbing those casting gigs in betwixt and between my directing gigs. And that's how the job working with Jeff Johnson and Vinnie Lift came about. It was one of those job gigs that came from my working at CSA as a part of my work at Hughes Moss. So some years before that, just out of college, I was working for a producer and Hughes Moss was casting the show, and it turned out that that producer and the people at Hughes Moss moved their offices into a new building at the same time on the same floor, and the construction was behind and the walls weren't up yet, so we basically shared one big space. And I really got to know the folks at Hughes Moss very well, and they became friends. So The reason that job happened for me with that producer, where I got to move into that office and get to know them, was because that producer went to someone she knew who was a producer and said to her assistant, I need a one like you. I need an assistant and I want a good one like you. Who do you know at NYU who's like a good person who I could hire? And he said, actually, I do know someone, and he recommended me, and I got the job. So, because I went to NYU, I got to know this guy who recommended me for this job, which enabled me to get to know the people at UseBoss, which got me the CSA gig. And the CSA gig was how I got to know all the other casting directors and built my credentials as an assistant and then an associate, and then went to Johnson Liff, from which I became an in-house casting director at Livent, and then Disney, and then to here. So, one more piece to the story. My best friend Ralph also went to Adelphi. That was also the class that Jonathan Larson was in, who went on to write Tick, Tick, Boom and Rent. And Ralph and I remained friends, of course, because we had been friends. We lived in the same neighborhood growing up in the Bronx. And one evening in June, we were hanging out. Ralph came with his car and picked me up, and we're going to go like hang out down in Manhattan or whatever. And when he arrived, he said, "You know, I feel like I got to tell you something, but I don't want you to be obnoxious about it." And I said, "What would I be obnoxious about? What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, you just got to promise you won't be obnoxious." I said, "All right, I promise I won't be obnoxious. When am I obnoxious? What? Tell me. What is the big? What do you have to tell me? What's the big deal?" And he said, "Well, we had our evaluations." At the end of the year today, they did our end of year evaluations, and Juan is very upset. And I said, "Why is Juan upset?" And he said, "Well, because the evaluation panel of the faculty, they said to him that, they felt like they gave him the scholarship, and there was a sensitivity and a nuance in his work that they expected to see, and they haven't seen since that audition, and they were very disappointed. They said that when he did the monologue, 'I Never Sang for My Father,' it was so beautifully done, they really expected a lot more from him." I did I Never Sang for My Father. They confused us because we look so much alike, which meant that Juan got the scholarship. And therefore, I went to NYU, and all of these things happened that led to everything I do and everything I am because of a guiding hand that you cannot see. So, trust. It's all going to be okay. Trust. I believe the saying is, God will get you to shore, but you must be in the boat, pointed toward shore, and rowing. Okay? So show up for your life. Show up in a big way. Be there. Correct any typos on your resume. Don't send a form letter unless you take out the pretend personal things, and show up for your interviews. Don't hang out a shingle too early. Go through the learning process. Show up for your life. And my mom, who is 95 years old, who has had a very satisfying life and is an absolute delight at 95 years old, because she's just had such a good life. She just savors every moment. She would always say to me, whatever it was I was talking about, whatever work thing was going on, or whatever project we were doing, whatever show we were casting, I'd come and say, this is going on, and that's going on, and we did this, and we did this, and this didn't work out, and we're trying to do this, and now we're trying to figure this out. And she'd always smile and say to me, "But are you having fun? That's the most important thing. Have fun." So, I offer you Mama's advice. Have fun. This is Arnold Mangioli for Grateful, Ready, Open, Willing, and I wish you all the very best of success and a journey filled with surprises and delights. Thanks for listening.